Clint Eastwood sat alone in his California home. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind he used to enjoy. But this one felt different. He wasn't filming. He wasn't editing. He just sat there, staring at his phone. A new notification lit up the screen. It was from a name he barely recognized. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso. Clint hesitated. Why would a revolutionary African leader send him a private message? Out of curiosity, he opened it. As his eyes moved across the screen, his expression changed, from confusion to shock, then to something else. His hand trembled slightly, his lips tightened, and then, something no one had ever seen before on camera. Clint Eastwood's eyes filled with tears. The room was silent. He blinked, but the tears didn't stop. Then, Clint whispered something barely audible. How did he know? But before he could finish his thought, he stood up, walked to his desk, and hit record on his phone's camera. Whatever he had just read was about to change everything, and the whole world was about to find out. The video Clint Eastwood recorded was never meant to go public, at least not that day. He sat down in front of the camera, his legendary voice softer than usual. This message is from a man I've never met, Clint said, holding up his phone. But he knew something no one else did. Then he read it aloud. It was a heartfelt voice note and translated letter from Captain Ibrahim Traoré, thanking Clint for a moment that had gone unnoticed by the world. A documentary Clint made in 1984 about forgotten African heroes, aired only once and quickly buried by American networks. You told the truth, Traoré's voice said, when it wasn't popular to do so. I was just a little boy, but my father showed me that tape. That moment changed how I saw my people. It planted a seed in me, and I never forgot it. Clint paused. His face tightened again. Then he said something that sent chills through every viewer. I thought no one saw that film. Not even the studio cared. But this man, this leader, remembered. And with that, Clint Eastwood began to cry again. The video Clint posted went viral in less than an hour. Millions watched, but no one could stop asking, what was the story behind the message? That answer came 3 days later, when the official Burkina Faso government page released an old black and white photo. A young boy, barefoot, sitting cross-legged on a dirt floor, eyes fixed on a small TV screen. The caption read, Ibrahim, 1985, watching the forgotten warriors with his father. The comments exploded. That's Traoré? He was just a child? This is real? In the photo, little Ibrahim's eyes were wide, innocent but focused. Next to him, his father, a weathered man with deep lines in his face, was holding back tears. People had no idea that this moment, a documentary barely aired, then lost, had sparked the spirit of a revolutionary. And now, decades later, the man who made that film had no idea he had shaped history until he got the message. Clint's voice echoed again in the minds of millions. How did he know? The world leaned in. The emotional storm was only beginning. After the video went viral, Clint Eastwood couldn't sleep. He sat by his fireplace that night, phone in hand, rereading the message from Traoré again and again. Something about it went deeper than just gratitude. There was a paragraph at the end that had stuck with him. My father told me, one day you will meet the man who showed you we matter. When you do, thank him for me, because I won't be there. Clint stared into the flames. His hands were shaking. Memories from his own past began flooding back. Memories of his father, of forgotten projects, and of one particular documentary he made in 1984, which no network had wanted to air. They said it was too serious, too raw, too African. But Clint had made it anyway. He didn't know then that a young boy in Burkina Faso would one day grow into a leader because of it. He suddenly whispered, almost to himself, "Did I really matter that much to someone like him?" His eyes watered again. But this time they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of realization. Just 2 days later, a new video appeared online. But this time, it was from Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself. The video wasn't flashy. It wasn't polished. It was recorded in a quiet room in Ouagadougou, with a flag of Burkina Faso behind him. His voice was calm. "Mr. Eastwood," he began, "when I was 9, my father and I watched your documentary in a crowded classroom. The only TV in the village was wheeled in. I still remember your voice narrating the story of forgotten African soldiers who fought in wars they didn't start." He paused, clearly emotional. "My father never cried," Traoré continued. "But that night he did. He said, 'The world may not see us, but this man does.'" Then came the part that broke viewers. "My father died 2 weeks later during the famine. I buried him with a photo of that TV screen in his hands." Millions of people watching the video cried. Even more paused in stunned silence. And at the end, Traoré looked directly into the camera and said, "Mr. Eastwood, I am who I am because of you." The world had never heard anything like this. Clint Eastwood sat alone once more, this time with tears running freely. He opened his old drawer, the one he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a worn-out envelope, yellowed, fragile. It was a letter he had written to himself after finishing The Forgotten Warriors in 1984. It read, "No one will care about this. No one will watch. But if just one boy somewhere feels seen, then it was worth it." Clint had never shared that letter with anyone. It had stayed hidden for 40 years. But now, with Traoré's words echoing in his ears, he realized something. That one boy had seen it, and that boy had become a man who now stood for millions. Clint placed the old letter beside his laptop. Then he started typing again. This time, a reply. A heartfelt one. He was going to write back to Captain Traoré. But little did he know. The next twist in the story would come not from Africa, but from a U.S. senator who had been watching everything unfold and who held a shocking secret that would change the entire narrative. Just as the world was beginning to process the emotional exchange between Eastwood and Traoré, something unexpected happened. An anonymous source leaked an old Senate hearing clip to the press. It showed a much younger U.S. senator, Senator Joseph Redmond, holding up a VHS tape in 1985. "This film," he said, "portrays African soldiers as heroes. It's not in America's best interest to air it widely." That film was The Forgotten Warriors, Clint Eastwood's documentary. The clip resurfaced and exploded across social media. People were furious. Why was this film buried? Why had the truth been silenced? But what shocked everyone most wasn't the footage. It was what happened next. Senator Redmond, now retired in '82, publicly apologized in a shaky video. "Clint, I was wrong. We silenced something powerful, and I've lived with that regret ever since." He added, "That little boy in Burkina Faso, he became more courageous than any of us." Suddenly, the emotional weight of Clint's forgotten film doubled. It wasn't just an artistic project, it was a suppressed truth. And now, the world wanted justice. News channels across the world began digging up the past. Burkina Faso's state television replayed The Forgotten Warriors in full, the first time it had aired on African TV since the 1980s. People crowded into schools, homes, even cafes, watching in silence. Many cried. Young Burkina Faso children asked their parents, "Why did we never see this before?" In one emotional moment caught on video, an elderly war veteran, missing an eye and walking with a cane, watched the documentary and whispered, "I thought we were forgotten." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Clint Eastwood was invited for a surprise live interview. But when he walked into the studio, he didn't know who would be on the video call waiting for him. It was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calling live from Ouagadougou. The moment they saw each other for the first time, the room fell silent. Clint's voice cracked. "You're real." Traoré nodded. "Because you believed in truth when it wasn't popular." The call lasted just 4 minutes, but left the entire studio in tears. Something deeper was building, and Clint hadn't even read the second half of Traoré's message yet. After the emotional broadcast, Clint returned home to find a small envelope waiting at his door, hand-delivered by a quiet Burkina Faso diplomat in New York. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was familiar. It was Traoré's message, Part 2, one Clint had never seen. As he opened it, the words stopped him cold. "Clint, there's something I've never told anyone. The day my father died, he whispered, 'If you ever meet this man, tell him he gave me back my pride before I left this world.'" Clint's hands trembled, but the next paragraph was even more personal. "When I took office, I visited the graveyard where my father rests. I played your documentary from my phone and let it echo through the dust and wind. I wanted him to hear your voice again." Clint covered his face and wept, harder than ever before. For decades he had thought the film was a failure, forgotten, erased. But now it was clear. It had saved a dying man's dignity, and it had raised a boy into a revolutionary. And still, the most shocking part was yet to come. That night, Clint couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the words in Traoré's second message, "You gave my father back his pride." He went into his garage, pulled out a dusty, sealed box that hadn't been opened in decades. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. It was Clint's personal journal from the time he filmed The Forgotten Warriors, his visit to West Africa in 1985. He flipped through the yellowed pages until he found something that made him freeze. Burkina Faso, April 14th. Met a soldier who said, "Tell your people we exist." He handed me a medal. I promised I'd return it to his son if he ever passed away. Clint's mouth went dry. He still had the medal, and now he knew who the soldier was. Traoré's father. He had kept that medal for nearly 40 years, never knowing where to send it. Suddenly, a man who had once seen war as a film subject now saw it as a promise unfulfilled, and the guilt began to rise inside him. This wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about keeping a dying man's word. Early the next morning, Clint called his team. He canceled all meetings, postponed interviews, and booked a flight. Destination, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. News of his unexpected trip hit international headlines, but Clint didn't go for press. He went to deliver the medal. When he arrived, cameras caught a surreal moment, a Hollywood legend walking across red earth, clutching a faded piece of history. Traoré met him at the foot of the presidential palace steps. They shook hands firmly. Then, silently, Clint placed the medal into Traoré's hands. The captain looked down and whispered, "He wore this the day he died." A few steps away, a group of schoolchildren began singing an old liberation song, one Clint had recorded in the documentary decades ago. Clint's lips quivered. He turned to the children, put his hand to his heart, and said, "I didn't forget you." Then Traoré said something that stunned even the reporters. America may have made Clint a legend, but Africa made him a witness. The whole world watched. Two men from different worlds, bonded not by politics, but by memory, promise, and truth. Back in Los Angeles, Clint's production team searched the archives to prepare a tribute reel for his Africa trip. But what they found was shocking. An old canister of unreleased footage. Inside was a clip of young Traoré's father, standing in the middle of a battlefield, cradling a wounded child and whispering, "One day my son will lead this land, and may he never forget who bled for it." Clint had never seen this clip before. It had been mislabeled and buried in storage for decades. They quickly edited the footage, paired it with scenes of modern-day Burkina Faso, and played it at a global press event hosted by the UN. People cried, not just because of the war scenes, but because of the haunting parallel of father's dying words becoming a son's living truth. When the video ended, Ibrahim Traoré walked to the stage and said, "We don't need superheroes in capes. We need storytellers who remember." Then turning to Clint, he added, "You remembered." The crowd gave a 3-minute standing ovation, and Clint, he wiped a tear from his cheek and simply said, "I just kept a promise." Before Clint left Burkina Faso, Traoré asked if he would visit a small village not far from the capital. There, in a sunlit hut, sat a blind old woman, Mabarka, once a nurse during the Liberation War. As Clint knelt beside her, she reached out and touched his face gently. "You are the man from the camera, the one who filmed the fire." She remembered him. Even without sight, she felt the moment. Then she told him something that took the air from his lungs. "Your camera gave us dignity. We had nothing. But when we saw you watching, we stood taller. My son died the night after you filmed." He said, "At least now, the world will see us." Clint's eyes welled up. Mabarka then pulled something from her worn cloth bag, a faded photograph of a 1985 Clint Eastwood standing among Burkina Faso soldiers. She had kept it all these years. Clint could barely speak. This wasn't just a visit anymore. It was a homecoming of the soul. And for the first time, he realized, I didn't come to give something back. I came because they never left me. That night, Clint sat in his hotel room overlooking Ouagadougou. In front of him was a letter, unfinished. He had written it 37 years ago after leaving Burkina Faso. It began, "To the people I met in the dust and fire." But he never mailed it. He never knew where to send it. Now, with his hands trembling, Clint finished it. "You showed me what courage looks like when the world isn't watching. You taught me what sacrifice means when no one will ever thank you. I left your soil, but your spirit never left mine." He placed the letter in an envelope and handed it to Traoré the next morning. "This belongs in your museum," Clint whispered. Traoré opened it, read silently, then looked up, deeply moved. "This is not just a letter," he said. "It's history, and history, when told truthfully, can heal." They embraced, and in that moment, a bridge formed between two worlds, two generations, two hearts, both marked by war, both longing for peace. As Clint prepared to return to America, Traoré invited him to one last stop, a quiet hilltop where his father was buried. The two men stood beneath a starlit sky, the wind gentle, the air thick with memory. Traoré knelt beside the grave and whispered, "I kept your dream alive, Papa." Then he turned to Clint and said, "He used to say, a man who holds a camera must also carry a conscience. I think that's what he saw in you." Clint's voice cracked. "He saw more in me than I ever saw in myself." As the two men lit a small lantern and placed it by the grave, villagers began gathering below with candles. Without warning, a chorus of voices began to rise, soft, ancient, powerful. A song sung during the revolution, a song Clint remembered hearing all those years ago. Tears rolled down his face. This wasn't just a farewell. It was forgiveness. It was redemption. And it was a moment no camera could ever truly capture. But Clint knew. I came here because of a message, but I'm leaving with something much deeper, a second chance at meaning. The morning Clint left Burkina Faso, Traoré gave him a small wooden box. Inside was a USB stick and a handwritten note. Play this when you're home, and not alone. Back in California, Clint waited until his children and grandchildren gathered at his ranch. He told them nothing, only pressed play. On screen, Traore appeared. No politics, no headlines, just a man, speaking to a family. To the Eastwood family, I want to thank you, not for Clint's fame, but because once, during a time of fire and fear, he gave my people a reason to believe we mattered. Your father didn't just capture a war, he captured our humanity, and that never fades. Tears flowed. Even Clint's eldest son held his head in his hands. The video ended with a single sentence that echoed in their hearts. A man is remembered, not for what he builds, but for what he awakens. No one spoke. Clint stood, looked out the window at the quiet hills, and whispered, "That's the message the world was never ready to hear." Until now. A week later, Clint was invited to appear on a popular U.S. late-night show. He hesitated, until his daughter reminded him, "Dad, maybe it's time America sees what you saw." The segment began light, films, old stories, laughs. Then the host shifted gears. "Clint, can you tell us about the message from Captain Ibrahim Traoré?" The room fell silent. Clint reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter Traoré had written, the one that had first moved him to tears. He read it aloud, voice breaking. "Dear Clint, my mother once told me, we fight not to win, but so our children won't have to. What you filmed in 1985 helped plant the seed of our freedom. You made our suffering visible. This is not just thanks. This is closure." By the time Clint finished, the host was wiping his eyes. "I've interviewed 1,000 celebrities, but I've never felt anything like this." That night, millions watched. But more than views, something deeper happened. People started Googling Traoré, Burkina Faso, the revolution. And for once, the world paused to listen. Months passed. Then, one early morning, Clint stood on a quiet hill in California with a small wooden cross in his hands. It was for a young Burkina Faso boy named Yakuba, killed decades ago during the revolution, but whose story Clint had never forgotten. He planted the cross beneath an old oak tree and whispered, "You mattered." Behind him stood his grandchildren, each holding a candle. The flame of remembrance had crossed continents. Later that day, Clint received a video call. Traoré appeared, standing beside a new school being built in Bobo Dioulasso. "We named it the Eastwood Center for Truth and Memory. Children here will grow up learning that even pain can be turned into purpose." Clint simply nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Ibrahim," he said. "No," Traoré replied. "Thank you, old lion." As the screen faded, Clint looked at the camera and whispered, "This story isn't about me. It's about never forgetting those who didn't get to tell theirs." If this story moved you even a little, don't just scroll away. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video to help it reach more hearts. And in the comments, tell us, what part of Clint and Traoré's journey touched you most? Let's honor stories that heal. Let's spread truth, not noise. And if this story made you cry, you're not alone. So did Clint. And maybe, just maybe, so did the world.